So today it is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce our guest speaker this morning, Joyce Austin. You will remember that Joyce was our guest speaker last September when she introduced to us the concept of little forests as an environmentally sustainable approach to forestation in urban environments in the face of declining biodiversity. And today, Joyce returns to tell us how Little Forest Kingston is embarking on an ambitious program to increase the forest canopy in our city, thereby making a significant contribution to increasing climate resilience. Her plan to create a city in a forest is well-timed as it converges with the City of Kingston's recent declaration of a climate crisis and its adoption of the Kingston Climate Leadership Plan. It also fits with the recent addition by Rotary International of protecting the environment as a new area of focus. Rotary is committed to supporting projects and activities that strengthen the conservation and protection of natural resources, advance ecological sustainability, and foster harmony between communities and the environment. As Rotarians in Kingston, we see a perfect opportunity to be of service to our community by becoming involved and sharing in the delivery of this project to help transform Kingston into a city in a forest. It is Joyce's dream that in the future, every child will be able to see 3 trees from their window, live in a neighborhood with a minimum of 30% quality canopy cover, and live within 300 meters of a quality green space. So a few words about Joyce. Joyce is a co-founder of Little Forest Kingston, a member of the Thousand Islands Master Gardeners, and is an adjunct professor at Queen's University in the Master of Earth and Energy Resources Leadership Program. Recently, Nature Canada recognized Little Forest Kingston with its Conservation Partner Award. Aside from Little Forest Kingston, and when not giving talks, Joyce enjoys writing short essays, including her photographs of the plants and wildlife she encounters during her walks on local trails and conservation lands in Kingston. She also advocates for people in Ontario who are fighting unconstitutional bylaw citations just for naturalizing their residential property and working with communities to create bylaws favoring biodiversity. So without further ado, please welcome our guest speaker, Joyce Austin.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And I'm so happy to be here with you all because you're such a beautiful, wonderful group for what you contribute to our community. I'll just share my screen. And Heather also already said about, the 2030, but we'll start from 2030. Imagine it's 2030. Every child can look out their window and see trees and the many creatures those trees support. On even the hottest days, they can walk or bike along a tree-lined street. To play, visit birds, observe insects, or hug a tree in a nearby forest. Once upon a time, though, these words began to vanish from the language of children. Wren, acorn, willow, moss, dandelion, bluebell, kingfisher, goldfinch. Those are words that the Oxford English Dictionary for Children took out of the dictionary because they thought they were no longer terribly relevant compared to words like copy and paste. And so a book was written called The Lost Words. And I think that's an indicator of our broken relationship with the natural world. So lost words, lost birds, biodiversity, as Heather mentioned, we're in a huge biodiversity crisis, and the latest climate report just came out, just highlighting how much we have yet to do to reverse this. We're in southeastern Ontario, and this is a picture of how much forest we have left. And we used to be 80% forest, and you can see how much forest that we have lost. Over 690 species of concern are southwest, and you can see in this map where the red is. We're in this red area where that decline has happened. And the lost relationships, and this is just highlighting the lost relationships, especially of our children, but of all of us, but the children being the most critical because they are our future. And this in North America really, I think, happened. It came about when the Europeans came to North America, and we brought with us this mindset, which some call the egotistical worldview, but whatever you call it, it's the worldview where humans are on top. But there's a different way of looking at it and a different way that we are learning. And as we explore Indigenous ways of learning and learn from the way that they stewarded this land, the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe here in our area, and Robin Wall Kimmerer says there's this other way of putting your hands in the earth and getting to work and saying, yeah, we've made a lot of mistakes, but we can be healers too. And this is just hands from Astrid's coaching somebody to how to plant a tree in a little forest. Maureen, she's one of co-founders, and she's First Nations. We are learning so much from her, and one of the things that she says is trees are medicine for children, children are medicine for trees. So this is the worldview, the framing as we look at and as we talk about city and a forest. I think this is one of the most important ways to keep in mind what makes it different from just planting trees. And another framing for that that's used is egotistical worldview. So moving from that egotistical to an ecotistical, and you can see in the egotistical, people are just one of the many beings that are all mixed. There's no hierarchy anymore. We are all beings are equally important. So Little Forest Kingston envisions Kingston as a positive city, a nature positive city in a forest. And as part of that 2 billion tree grant we wrote, and the partnership that Rotary built with us, it's like, how do we make Kingston a nature positive city in a forest by 2030? Can we do that? So that's the 3 trees from your window, 30% tree canopy, 300 meters to the nearest park. But this is also part of that, and Heather mentioned the biodiversity, is we are still, and it's kind of scary to think, our biodiversity is still declining. We haven't hit the stabilization point, and we haven't started to bring it back. And so Canada signed on to a goal to become nature positive by 2030. So we actually in decline. I mean, so we won't get to nature positive until 2030, but little forests are one of those ways here in Kingston that we can help make this happen, both by planting the little forest, but also by changing the relationship between ourselves as humans and the world around us, the natural world around us. And I'm just going to show some images. These aren't specifically little forests, but these are reimagining about how our cities could evolve as we plant little forests or as we integrate more closely into the natural world around us. A bank's empty lawn, an urban backyard, in this case, somebody with somebody who can't actually walk around the space, but can enjoy the space. The suburban residents, and this one is actually an edible, not quite a full forest, but a little bit of a food forest. It's an edible forest that neighbors walking by can harvest. Even the entrance to a strip mall, how might that be reimagined? If empty parking areas were redone, it could become neighborhood parks. And this is from a neighborhood in Vancouver where they're actually over a 10-block radius turning a street into kind of a naturalized streetscape, including stormwater capture and building a little wetland. There's no little forest there, but there could very well be. And this is actually the first little forest that you'll see here. This is Tiny Forest in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and they've been doing an amazing job of how they're transitioning their city to be resilient. And this is a little forest that they planted on the left. You'll see the bare space here. And on the right, they planted a little forest, which is also going to be a learning hub for the university. This is in France. And you can see there's this little triangle, and this is more than 6 parking spaces, this is 8. But they reimagined it, and just this year they planted a little forest where those parking spaces were. And for a little forest, all you need is 6 parking spaces. This is my yard, so we can do it at the individual level. And when I did my yard, I wasn't thinking little forests. I didn't know about them at the time. But fortunately, the squirrels had some really good ideas about how to make that happen. So they kind of inadvertently ended up with a little forest. In India, they've really kind of adopted this methodology. And I'll say just a little bit more about it in a minute. And this is just one of the many examples in India about how they're using this methodology to afforest their cities. In Montreal and little forests, one of the things we think about, and one of the things I think is really important in the campaign for climate resilience that we would launch with the city for 2024 would be also thinking about forests and along with ecological corridors. And this is an example in Montreal where they are doing that. And you can see this little space on the left. Right now, that is 70% asphalt. And they are reimagining it. And they're actually mapping out ecological corridors, a part of the revitalization of that area. And so this is just how they are planning. This is what it will look like when it's finished. 3300 builds climate resilience for extreme heat events. And so in the BC heat wave, you can see they mapped in their neighborhood, like in Vancouver, a mapping of urban heat islands. And so these are the extra hot spaces, and they map to socioeconomic status and tree canopy. And in BC, they had double the heat-related hospitalizations in the area, this red area that had the lowest canopy. And so we're working with City of Kingston this summer to create an urban heat island map for Kingston, and that will be mapped against socioeconomic. And the canopy report is coming out next week, so we're watching for that. It also increases biodiversity. So right now, again, we really haven't focused on native plants, and little forests are all about native plants and native trees and shrubs. And you can see on the left the number of birds and insects that might have a relationship with a non-native tree versus on the right, where the relationships have long established over millennia, well, centuries, millennia. It's also a regenerative approach to greening and city and building planetary health. So often we talk about sustainability, but there's a difference between sustainability and resilience and regeneration. And this is just a little short video of the difference.
Reed's framework really helped me to understand sustainability in a different way, showing that as we move from business as usual, the unsustainable practice, to green, which is just tweaking our behavior a little bit, being a little bit less bad, but still having a negative impact, to sustainable, 100% less bad, but doesn't actually give back and restore the damage we've already done on this planet. We're moving beyond sustainable design to restorative design, which means reforesting, creating new ecosystems, but it's still within the mindset of man over nature. So the next step beyond that even is reconciliatory design, which we reconcile the relationship between humanity and nature, include culture in nature, and create a world where our designs express that. And even beyond that, we move towards regenerative design, which is creating cultures that are able to work creatively with disruptions rather than to avoid them, to be resilient to change, because change is the only constant that we have on this planet, and be able to hand over to the next generation a richer, more regenerative, more resilient system than we received from the previous. So
that, and I mentioned like Joanne, another co-founder, this is what she says, is what will make the effort to plant little forests. So the approach we want to take with the campaign is the infusion of Indigenous ways of knowing. So that mindset, the worldview that he mentioned, the planting a little forest, it really is a direct act of decolonization and embodying the land acknowledgement. So we're coming into relationship with the land and the beings it supports as we restore a forest Kingston. And that's really embodying that egotistical worldview. And one of the phrases that we've adopted as a core value, and Richard Waganese, he talked about all my relations, and Maureen uses this all the time and really helping us center on this. All my relations. It's hugely important. It's our saving grace in the end. It points to the truth that we are all related. We are all connected. We all belong to each other. The most important word is all, not just those who look like me, sing like me, dance like me, speak like me, pray like me, or behave like me, all my relations. And I have a picture here of a little spring peeper because Maureen first spoke about this when she visited the land at Highway 15, the site of one of the first little forests. And she said, the first language she heard on that land wasn't English. It wasn't Anishinaabe-Moan. It was the language of the spring peepers. It was early spring and they were out singing. And Little Forest, this is kind of summarizes our theory of change, is that when a system is far from equilibrium, which our system on Earth right now is, a small island of coherence has the capacity to shift the entire system. And this is from a physicist. And I heard it from John Thacker, who's a wonderful designer over in the UK. And each little forest I see as one of those small islands of coherence. And as more and more of us get involved and help plant, we have the capacity to shift the system. So we can do it at the individual scale, at the neighborhood scale, at the campus scale, and like Barcelona, Singapore, and Paris, and hopefully like Kingston as we go forward, is by putting greenery at the center of urban planning, mobility, public health. They're actually talking about it in terms of mobility, public health, sustainability, social rights, and culture. So it's touching upon basically every aspect of well-being in a city. And if we can integrate it into, Kingston now has that 15-minute city concept. They're not talking about it a lot yet, but I think as the climate lens comes forward and more work is done from the climate leadership team, I think this concept is going to grow, and we're like to see like little forests are really important in that.
We leave you with a look back at the highlights of a remarkable decade that has changed Australia forever.
The 2020s began in extraordinary fashion.
Work more regionally.
More work, more opportunity.
Solar and batteries would be ideal.
And build a sustainable society.
Today marked the first time that Australia has run on 90% renewable energy for an entire month.
That makes me feel really, really happy.
The government today announced it will follow the lead of other countries and live stream key policy discussions.
I think it's good. We need transparency.
Australians are now seeking out Australian-made and owned products. The ripple effect is that we are now seeing healthy farmers.
There's nothing like endangered animals in a landscape that's coming back to life to give all Australians a real heartbeat.
We can deal better with the world when we're connected.
I'm just going to stop that video there. That's like a 2-minute preview of a video that they made in Australia, and they're launching a campaign there. And they, over the last 4 months, they had gone around and interviewed Australians all around, and they put together this video that was set in New Year's Eve 2029. And I thought, that video, like, what if we did that to launch the campaign for climate resilience? And we stepped forward to 2030 and then looked back and said, here's what 2030 is, and here's how we got there. So the approach that we're using is called the Miyawaki inspired. It's Miyawaki inspired, and he's a botanist in Japan who 30 years ago said that we can't wait 30 years for natural reforestation. And so he came up with this method of doing it within 15 to 25 years. And that's the method that we're using. And he actually upped the effort after the tsunami and are planting little forests all along the shoreline. And another thing they're doing is this forest over a landscape idea. So when you say little city in a forest, that's kind of thinking about the forest over the landscape of the entire city. And here in this image, what they're doing in Japan now is they're planting little forests around buildings, around factories, along shorelines, and just everywhere that also might be at risk with some of the extreme weather events that we are seeing more and more happening. The forests are 4 layers and 35 plus native species. And so you can imagine the biodiversity explosion that will happen when they are planted. And here are the first 3 that we planted this year: Lakeside, Wolf Island, and Highway 15. This is what they look like when we started. So as you can see, really nothing but mowed grass for the most part. The one being planted this fall is Addictions and Mental Health. And this is a map created by someone in the addictions and mental health community about what the space could be like. And the little forest here is going to be on the left side of this. This is a landscape architect is kindly doing a couple of pro bono landscape drawings. And this one is actually the food forest, but he's also doing little forests around the Champlain Kingston Secondary School little forest site. We're still working with the school board. We hope next year to be planting in at least 1, possibly up to 3 schools. The school board we met with a few weeks ago, and it seems like support is really, really growing. There's a lot of really keen interest. So it's more just working through the process. St. Lawrence, a student project, and they were competing in a province-wide project management competition. And here is a little forest that they have proposed for the center of that large center place at St. Lawrence College. And just the way it integrates into the learning, I think, is fabulous. And these were when they first started their presentation, these were the sustainability goals that they thought it aligned to. And then I showed them the microbiome research that is really showing that the biodiversity of our cities really affects the biodiversity of our microbiome of our gut. And that they now think has a lot to do with a lot of our autoimmune. So it really links also to good health and well-being in many different ways. But also like reduced inequalities, the 330-300, we have tree and equity, map to canopy, sustainable cities and communities. I think that's, the quality education, the tight link to education. So this is the process, and I won't go through the process, but we have a process that we explored this past year, and we need to map out in more detail. And this is like part of what we would be working with on the Forest Stewardship Network, is those really super interested in how all along the process, forest stewards are actively engaged in planning, planting, and caring for and monitoring the little forests. And this is just a picture from the little forest that was planted at Highway 15, where Laura Murray played her cello for the forest. And the poem was written by Kingston's poet laureate, and he came and read it to a tree at the lakeside little forest. And one of the things about little forests and the approach is that it really is about centering the land. And Maureen thanks to Maureen, we put that as our first value, first principle. Are we centering the land? Because so much of a sustainability discussion really is about humans right now, and how do we, improve things for humans versus the land and all the beings, with humans being one of those beings.
Hij is echt mooi. Ik wil wachten zijn ervoor. Dus dat zit nu al in dit bosje, hè? Je zegt net ook al een kruispunt. Laat hem maar even vrijdag. Ik heb deze, maar ik weet niet wat voor een.
That was just a short clip from one of they call them tiny forests in the Netherlands, but they're all centered around schools, and they all become hubs for learning and building that relationship. So the disconnection that I mentioned at the beginning of children from the natural world, little forests, by being right there in their neighborhoods and being at the schools, can help shift that. So this is like let's grow that city in the forest. Being good ancestors. And again, this is Maureen really reminding of this for us, that how do we start seeing ourselves as being good ancestors in everything that we do, not just for humans, but for all our relations? And bring climate hope. And so these are a couple of the quotes from some of the KSS, the Kingston Secondary School students. The Sweetgrass Circle was really, really fabulously heavily involved. And we hope, like going forward, youth, just really growing that relationship with youth, because there's so much. I think we all know the anxiety, the climate anxiety that especially our youth are facing right now, are suffering from. And by being able to work with and the relationships, several of them mentioned the relationship of working with adults. See here, talking to the adults, finding common ground on the environment. So the building relationships with all different age groups, I think, is one of the really important aspects. So the Forest Stewardship Network, and this is where it's like the exciting to have that partnership with Rotary around the Forest Stewardship Network, because none of this is going to, we won't, we'll be able to plant, 1 or 2 little forests a year, maybe, I'm not sure, without, but to really manifest like this whole relationship and change in our city, where we are all connected back to the land. This Forest Stewardship Network is really, really probably the most critical element of this, and making our city a city in a forest, because asking the city to do it, they can't do it. They don't have the staff, and it doesn't affect any change in relationship with the natural world. So the Forest Stewardship Network, this is what can make this happen. This is what can make this help us kind of co-design the vision and the whole way that that 2030, like if we did a video to that 2030 video and stepping backwards. And so in the 2 billion tree grant, the capacity building grant, this is what we put in the grant about the Forest Stewardship Network: mobilizing volunteers to assist communities in forest planting, planning, and care, building the skills and leading the projects, and those I think we're now calling site champions. And that would be like Kelsey for the addictions and mental health forest, where she doesn't really know anything about trees and forests, although she's been learning, but she knows her community and how to build community and get them on board for planting a little forest. Training the youth and using the NCRA toolkit, and that's the climate resilience assessment toolkit that we worked with a PhD group at Queen's on, and we still need a lot of work to do on that. But the street level mapping, and especially, working with youth to map their neighborhoods, and facilitating on the land learning for babies to elders. And with I guess Heather and Robert and John and Anna, we did a first kind of visioning together, Little Forest and Rotary. And really, when I look back at this, and we imagined just 2027, but if you look back at these black stickies here, which we're capturing in the smaller stickies, I would say they all really reflect this egotistical worldview that we've shifted our mindsets towards this other worldview. And there's going to be a whole ton of learning around that, but I thought that was kind of fabulous to look back at. So the Forest Stewardship Network, and here's just a few things that, and I'm not going to kind of break down some of the roles the approaches that we've talked about it yet, but what we're trying to do is find land, and to do this to a forest and to reach the goals of 2030, we need to find the land and so that we can plant little forests on them. And, with the partnership that Rotary now has formed with Cedars, one of my questions would be, is that a potential site? And what learning could we help around or grow? Because the Forest Stewardship Network, we have to learn it. We have to co-design it. 2 of the ones this year, Wolf Island is going to plant a second one in addictions and mental health. And as part of that, we're thinking we can maybe co-design the learning module. So if some Rotarians are really interested in actually the deeper learning and the trainer, those would be great opportunities to really get involved with, because we're thinking maybe the learning, and we do videos on the land, and Wolf Island, Astrid is phenomenal in her knowledge. And then we take little videos with the learning, and because we don't know what we even need to know until we start working with people on the land. And then caring for a little forest, that's another part of the Forest Stewardship Network. And we've got 3 to care for this year, Lakeside, Highway 15 and Wolf Island, and April 16th. And this would be like one of those opportunities just to come out and help, versus like the deeper learning of co-designing learning modules, where it's removing protection, checking mulch, doing your survival count. In June, doing some weeding, in July to September, monitoring for watering. And then mapping neighborhoods with youth. They, oh, what's the department? Public Works reached out, and they want actually support with their tree canopy program, neighborhood tree program. And so while Little Forest is, we call ourselves Little Forest, we're going to be helping with canopy overall. And I think this would be a great opportunity to get involved in that. They realize that their neighborhood tree program isn't reaching equity, isn't helping with equity across the city right now. And so their question was, could Little Forest help them with their fall, and then next year, especially with tree equity? And so we talked about the Neighborhood Climate Assessment Resilience Toolkit, and it's hoping to prototype that out in Kings Court and Rideau Heights, because Public Works said they are definitely been identified as 2 of the areas lacking tree canopy and lacking tree equity in Kingston. So that would be like a great opportunity to work around refining that toolkit and working with youth around doing that mapping. Conducting citizen science, and the start of the like Lakeside, etc. That's the start of that, in that, we're going to figure out monitoring protocols, and just the species count, survival count is part of that, and maybe doing some habitat to start, and then working on the influencing the policy. So what do we need to have in the climate lens and the urban heat island map? And just ending with, I think this is a really important, like Dwayne Donald, and he's a Cree from Alberta. And this is the question that he asked, a series of questions that he suggests asking. And I really like this series of questions, because the more I deepen work with Little Forest, the more I learn from Maureen. These are questions I think are really important. Where is here? Who am I that I am here? Who else is here alongside me? What gives and sustains life here? How can I participate in the life that is here? How can we live well together here? So that's it for the slides. And then now it's like, discussion.
Okay, so we can ask Joyce some questions. We just have a few more minutes for questions, so we'll open up to that. I think I need to see everyone. Does anyone have questions? Bill Aglikoff.
Well, this question has probably been already asked, but we've recorded your talk. May we share it with other people?
Yes.
Because yes. I'm going to do that. I have a meeting at 10 o'clock, and it's actually planning a joint worship service by several churches, including ones that are involved with the land on Highway 15, and it's going to be about honoring the land. And I want people to hear your talk and think about the things that you've said, so this is. I just wanted to say that this has been a real inspiration to me personally.
Thank you, Bill. Elsabe, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Joyce. You have spoken to our club a few years ago, and I'm really happy to be here, and I hope we can all together be part of this. I would like to see this wider than Kingston and Rotary, our district wide. But I have a question in Kingston specifically, or many other Ontario towns. As an immigrant, that was one of the things that I thought coming to Kingston, Thunder Bay, the wide streets, but no trees, no tree canopy. Is there anything afoot to get the or to make tree, for example, the middle part of Princess Street, put tree canopy in there?
I think this becomes like the planning part, where it's like influencing city policy. I think that's really, 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 really important, because there's so many restrictions right now on where we can plant and what we could do. And I haven't read the new zoning thing that just came out. I don't know if that would be relevant. The tree canopy report is coming to the EITP committee on the 12th, and we're going to be in there and giving some delegations. And I think places like that, and we want to actually do out a map of how city planning works to try and say, how can we keep influencing? And I think things like the city now seems to have really grabbed on to 330, 300. They get that. Urban heat islands, I think, are, you know, another potential lever where we can show like that. I don't remember if I put that picture of the thermometer on a street that had shading by trees and a street that didn't, but it's a 15-degree difference. And so I think that's an ongoing, we have a lot of work to do to influence city policy. And if anybody is interested in that, there's actually a policy, a planner speaking through United Church. I forget which one, but it's coming up this week. So I'm going to be going to that. But we want to actually map out and then really, and when the city council get elected, you know, as part of the campaign, asking these questions, and then the first 100 days and really seeing if we can get into the strategy going forward, I think, for the next council meeting. So yeah, we're thinking a lot about that, and anybody who likes policy and influencing city, get involved.
Excellent. Tim Brown, maybe the last question, and if anyone else has questions, perhaps you could put it in the chat and Joyce would be able to answer that for you. Jim?
I'd rather plant trees than do policy, Joyce, you know that. Joyce, you know we are fans, and you know you always deliver us a very concise, succinct message in such a loving and inclusive way. And you know, after listening to the IPC report yesterday, we are falling behind, and said we've got to triple our efforts, if not more. And you and Maureen and Joanne and Rotary, I commend you for having Joyce on here once again. I don't think we can get enough of this kind of stuff. You are the lights that are heading in the right direction. So I thank you for all the work you're doing. I don't know what got you into this, but boy, oh boy, keep going, and you got all our support forever. So thank you.
Excellent.
Nice to see you.
Okay, so we're running out of time, so forgive me for rushing you, but